In the course of the evening other strong but bright impressions began to flow into his soul. We have already spoken of that. He forgot his premonition. When he heard about Pavlishchev, and Ivan Fyodorovitch brought him and introduced him again to Ivan Petrovitch, he moved closer to the table and ended up right in the armchair next to the enormous, beautiful Chinese vase, which stood on a pedestal almost at his elbow, slightly behind him. With his last words he suddenly got up from his place, carelessly waved his arm, somehow moved his shoulder, and a general cry rang out. The vase rocked, as if undecided at first whether it might not fall on the head of one of the little old men, but suddenly it leaned in the opposite direction, towards the little German, who barely managed to jump aside in terror, and toppled onto the floor. Noise, shouts, precious pieces scattered over the rug, fear, amazement. Oh, it is difficult and almost unnecessary to depict how it was for the prince. But we cannot omit mention of one strange sensation that struck him precisely at that very moment and suddenly made itself distinct in the crowd of all the other vague and strange sensations. It was not the shame, not the scandal, not the fear, not the unexpectedness that struck him most of all, but the fulfilled prophecy. Precisely what was so thrilling in this thought he would have been unable to explain to himself. He felt only that he was struck to the heart, and he stood in a fear that was almost mystical. Another moment and everything before him seemed to expand. Instead of horror there was light, joy, rapture. His breath was taken away, but the moment passed. Thank God, it was not that. He caught his breath and looked around. For a long time he seemed not to understand the turmoil seething around him. That is, he understood it perfectly well and saw everything, but stood as if he were a special person, not taking part in anything, like the invisible man in a fairy tale, who has gotten into a room and is observing people who are strangers but who interest him. He saw the broken pieces being removed, heard rapid talk, saw Aglaya, pale and looking at him strangely, very strangely. There was no hatred in her eyes at all, nor any wrath. She looked at him with frightened but such sympathetic eyes, and at the others with such flashing eyes his heart suddenly ached sweetly. Finally he saw with strange amazement that everyone was sitting down and even laughing, as if nothing had happened. Another moment and the laughter grew louder. They laughed looking at him, at his stunned speechlessness, but they laughed amicably, merrily. Many addressed him and spoke so gently, above all Lizaveta Prokofyevna. She was laughing and saying something very, very kind. Suddenly he felt Ivan Fyodorovitch giving him a friendly pat on the shoulder. Ivan Petrovitch was also laughing, but still better, still more attractive and sympathetic was the little old man. He took the prince by the hand and, pressing it lightly, patting it lightly with the palm of his other hand, was persuading him to recollect himself, as if he were a frightened little boy, which the prince liked terribly much, and finally sat him down next to him. The prince peered into his face with delight and for some reason was still unable to speak. He was breathless. He liked the old man's face so much. "What?" he finally murmured. "So you really forgive me?" "And, you, too, Lizaveta Prokofyevna?" The laughter increased. Tears welled up in the prince's eyes. He could not believe it and was enchanted. Of course, it was a beautiful vase. I remember it being here for all of 15 years, yes, 15, Ivan Petrovitch began. Well, it's no disaster. A man, too, comes to an end, and this was just a clay pot. Lizaveta Prokofyevna said loudly. "You're not so frightened, are you, Lev Nikolaich?" She added even with fear. "Enough, dear boy, enough, you really frighten me." "And you forgive me for everything? For everything besides the vase?" The prince suddenly began to get up from his place, but the little old man at once pulled him down again by the hand. He did not want to let him go. "C'est très curieux, et c'est très sérieux," he whispered across the table to Ivan Petrovitch, though quite loudly. The prince may have heard it. "So I didn't offend any of you? You wouldn't believe how happy that thought makes me, but so it should be. How could I have offended anyone here? I'd offend you again by thinking so. Calm yourself, my friend, that is an exaggeration. And you generally have no reason to thank us so much. It's a beautiful feeling, but it's exaggerated. I'm not thanking you, I simply admire you. I'm happy looking at you. Perhaps I'm speaking foolishly, but I need to speak, I need to explain, even if only out of respect for myself. Everything in him was impulsive, vague, and feverish. It may well be that the words he spoke were often not the ones he wanted to say. By his gaze he seemed to be asking, "May I speak to you?" His gaze fell on Belokonsky. "Never mind, dear boy, go on, only don't get out of breath," she observed. "You started breathlessly earlier and see what it led to, but don't be afraid to speak. These gentlemen have seen queerer than you, they won't be surprised, and God knows you're not all that clever, you simply broke a vase and frightened us." Smiling, the prince listened to her. "It's very curious, and very serious." "Wasn't it you?" He suddenly turned to the little old man. "Wasn't it you who saved the student Podkomov and the clerks Fabrine from being exiled 3 months ago?" The little old man even blushed slightly and murmured that he ought to calm down. "Wasn't it you I heard about," he turned to Ivan Petrovitch at once, "who gave free timber to your burned-out peasants in Provence, though they were already emancipated and had caused you trouble?" "Well, that's an exaggeration," murmured Ivan Petrovitch, though assuming a look of pleased dignity, but this time he was perfectly right that it was an exaggeration. It was merely a false rumor that had reached the prince. "And you, princess," he suddenly turned to Belokonsky with a bright smile, "didn't you receive me 6 months ago in Moscow like your own son, following a letter from Lizaveta Prokofyevna, and give me, as if I were indeed your own son, some advice which I will never forget?" "Do you remember?" "Why get so worked up?" Belokonsky responded vexedly. "You're a kind man, but a ridiculous one. Someone gives you 2 cents, and you thank them as if they'd saved your life." "You think it's praiseworthy, but it's disgusting." She was getting quite angry, but suddenly burst out laughing, and this time it was kindly laughter. Lizaveta Prokofyevna's face also lit up. Ivan Fyodorovitch brightened, too. I told you that Lev Nikolaich is a man in short, if only he didn't become breathless, as the princess observed, the general murmured in joyful rapture, repeating Belokonsky's words, which had struck him. Aglaya alone was somehow sad, but her face still burned, perhaps with indignation. He really is very nice, the little old man again murmured to Ivan Petrovich. I came here with pain in my heart, the prince went on, with a somehow ever-increasing perturbation, speaking faster and faster, more strangely and animatedly. I was afraid of you, afraid of myself as well. Most of all of myself. Returning here to Petersburg, I promised myself to be sure and see our foremost people, the elders, the ancient stock, to whom I myself belong, among whom I am one of the first by birth. For I am now sitting with princes like myself, am I not? I wanted to know you, that was necessary, very, very necessary. I've always heard so much more bad than good about you, about the pettiness and exclusiveness of your interests, about your backwardness, your shallow education, your ridiculous habits. Oh, so much has been written and said about you. It was with curiosity that I came here today, with perturbation. I had to see for myself and become personally convinced. Is it actually so that this whole upper stratum of the Russian people is good for nothing, has outlived its time, has exhausted its ancient life, and is only capable of dying out, but in a petty, envious struggle with people of the future, hindering them, not noticing that it is dying itself? Before, too, I never fully believed this opinion, because we've never had any higher estate, except perhaps at court, according to the uniform, or by chance, and now it has quite vanished, isn't it so, isn't it so?